Hey, good morning. It's March 8th, D+13, Russia invasion of Ukraine. This map isn't quite as of 1300. It's a couple hours early, so it's as of 1800 Bravo time zone. So through most of the daylight hours in Ukraine, actually through sunset just occurred. So in the daylight right now in Ukraine, D+13. I'm slowing down on the frequency of these because I'm getting in on the Borderlands as a military analyst there, which is weird calling myself a military analyst. I guess I am, whether I want to admit it or not, right? So I'm doing those every 3 to 4 days, whenever Sam needs me. I'm there as part of that. All pro bono, right? I don't get paid for any of this, and that's fine. None of my social media is monetized. I don't do any of that. This keeps my brain engaged, and I hope keeps some people informed who need to be informed of what really happens in a world that is not always wholesome and good. There are bad people on this planet, and their currency is power. So that's why I do this. But like I said, I'm slowing down the frequency of mine because I'm keeping it updated, participating in the Borderlands because I think that's really critical work that Sam's doing and bringing in a diverse range of people involved in what's going on in Ukraine. And he's much closer, finger on the pulse, to what's going on there. Sam's currently in eastern Poland, having left Ukraine just a little over 2 weeks ago. So, but anyway, I'll just try to follow a format. I'm going to change my map probably tomorrow because this map, what I like about this map is it shows political boundaries inside Ukraine. And then the 4 main colored areas I have in there are actually how Russia has Ukraine partitioned into 4 military districts. All right, so they have a Western military district, an Eastern military district, a Southern, and a Northern. Right, so that's how Russia's already partitioned it, and so that's why I've used this and highlighted those areas, right? Because it helped me visualize the campaign. What I don't like is I've colored in these areas, multiple maps, multiple inputs, trying to get a representation here of Russia-controlled terrain. These are red blobs, and that's the problem. Because Russia doesn't control as much as it even appears on this map, where I've red blobbed it out. Particularly in the north, the northern half of Ukraine, not just the northern military district, but kind of draw a line right here where my mouse is going. I think north of that, Russia doesn't really control much. At most, they control major highways and some minor highways, and then the terrain immediately to the left and right of the road. That's kind of what they control up there right now. So to say that Russia owns all this terrain here north and west of Kyiv is not entirely accurate. They control this major line of communication coming south out of Belarus, as well as a couple offshoot, arteries off of that. But to say they control that span of terrain is not entirely accurate. So I'm going to work over the next day or so and try to develop something that really more resembles what they control. And so instead of these blobs, you're going to see roads highlighted, right? And they'll be colored red. That kind of shows what Russia actually controls. Now, obviously, when we get down south, we get in the Donbass, Mariupol, Crimea. Yeah, that's more blobbish. But in the north, it's lines is what you're going to see. So with that, talk some of the key events. We're over 2 million refugees have left Ukraine, and those are not all Ukrainian, right? Because Ukraine is a crossroad in Eastern Europe. It's a land bridge from Europe to Asia. It's a northern trade route, and historically we saw that over the past 1,000 years that trade does move across this landmass that is Ukraine from Europe to the Far East. All right, so this is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country and people. Yes, they're Kiev and Rus, but who are Kiev and Rus? Who are Tartars, right? Who are these people? Well, it's all of that. Ukraine is all of that. And you can look at the religious demographics of Ukraine as well. Yeah, it's predominantly Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox. Kind of use those a little interchangeably. There's subtle differences in there. Then there are Ruthenians, right? So those are Catholics. They're in communion in Rome. So that's like 10% of the population is Eastern Rite Catholics or Latin Rite Catholics. About 10% of the population. 2 to 3% Muslim. Less than 1% Jewish. And then you have many of your Eastern religions. Probably the most populous of those would be Hindu in Ukraine, right? And because we're really not that far off from India and that trade route. So 2 million refugees. So a little bit of mix of everyone. Africans, Western Europeans, Americans, Ukrainian women and children. All right, so 2 million people. That's a huge volume of people, predominantly in Poland, a significant number in Romania, and then Slovakia, Hungary, Germany. Some have gone into Belarus. Obviously, some have sought refuge in Russia as well, or Moldova. So, but Poland and Romania are really taking in a large number of refugees. Poland's probably well over 1 million at this point. All right. We've seen over the past couple days Ukraine consistently pressuring the international Western community for assistance, primarily in fixed-wing aircraft and air defense systems. And so kind of what I think, and multiple sources reporting this, Poland, right there, immediately to the west of Ukraine, their Air Force is predominantly MiG-29 based. They have a large number of MiG-29s, which is a good fixed-wing aircraft. And the Ukrainian Air Force is familiar with the MiG-29. So what looks like to happen, Poland's going to ship their MiG-29s to Ukraine, like they should, because Poland should be NATO interoperable. Go figure, as a NATO country. So I think what we'll have is U.S. made, produced F-35s go to Poland to backfill their requirement so they can send their MiG-29s in support of Ukraine. So I think that's how that's going to work out, and that's logical. Air defense systems, I think predominantly you're going to see those continue to flow into Ukraine in the form of manned portable air defense systems like shoulder-fired Stinger missiles, and and probably some capability to help Ukraine maintain their air defense radar picture, right? Because that provides the air operations picture. And also, we're probably getting that feed going straight into NATO of the air picture, right? So that's where I think some of that assistance is going to come in for Ukraine. Zelensky's also asked to shut down their airspace and make it a no-fly zone. But you've heard from multiple people say that's a bad idea. I tend to agree. Making it a no-fly zone doesn't meet what he actually intends to say, because it will rapidly escalate. I think we're seeing some Grozny type operations by Russia, predominantly in the north, and Kharkiv and Chernihiv, Poltava, right, where we are seeing pretty indiscriminate indirect fires into those cities. Keep seeing it to a lesser degree, but a lot of area fire, cannon, rocket, predominantly rocket and missile fire into large population centers in the north. All right, so it's not precision fires; it's area fires. A couple things this makes me think about is, and I've mentioned before, Russia's precision guided munitions. I think their PGM capability and capacity is kaput. I think they expended the preponderance of their precision guided munitions in Syria, in Crimea in 2014, as well as in Donetsk in 2014-15, and they don't have the industrial base and capability to replenish precision guided munitions, right? I think that also feeds into why the Russian Air Force is frankly missing from the fight. If you don't have precision guided munitions, you really don't have fourth and fifth generation aircraft. It kind of takes that capability from them. And we know Russia has, like Gen 4.5, like the Su-34, 35 aircraft, but we're not really seeing those fighters from the Russian Air Force in Ukraine. We're seeing Su-30s, a lot of those. More Su-30s than, say, the Su-34. So a little bit older, and loaded with conventional dumb munitions, is what we're seeing a lot of. We're seeing a lot of shot down. So it tells me that Russia doesn't see, at least the Russian Air Force leadership, doesn't want to commit their best aircraft to the fight, because without precision-guided munitions, there's no sense in it. We have other aircraft that are cheaper, older, less valuable strategically, that can drop those munitions just as well as our latest and greatest. Consequently, these become area weapons instead of point weapons. And once you've gone into an area weapon, your fires appear more indiscriminate, and very well, I think in this case, are intentionally indiscriminate, as Russia is really waging a campaign of terror through their indirect fire and their Air Force attacks in the cities in the north. Right? It is a reign of terror. That is what's going on here. And they have no problem leveling these cities and going Grozny style to try to achieve tactical and operational wins. Right? So I see what that leads to. Kharkiv's one of the easier targets for Russia because it's so close to the border, and Russia is actually able to maintain logistics into their units there. So that's a classic seize. I think it is level the city, and we'll deal with the aftermath of it later. I think you also have that in Chernihiv, there in the north, relatively close to the border, and fairly easy for Russia to target and conduct ground-based attack. Got multiple reports that Mariupol is in the hands of Russia now. So I've drawn an op box there around Mariupol. I think what Russia is going to want to do is consolidate gains and try to close off this line of communication. It'll be a pretty narrow bridge of control from the Donbass down through Mariupol. Also, Russia is able to project combat power out of Crimea and kind of connect this land bridge here along the south. Again, it's going to be pretty thin. And what I kind of compared it to is the game of Risk, right? When in the game of Risk, when you fight and you take territory, you kind of want to garrison what's behind you, or else your opponents are going to come in and just take that terrain back. So that's what Russia's running into. They're really stretching this line of communication really thin, and not well supported behind their line of advance. So I think this is going to be this op box right here for Russia is going to be pretty difficult to maintain this bridge. But I think they have the capability to get this. Where I'm watching over the next several days is this op box I drew over here, with Odessa centered in it. Because we know here in Moldova, this is Transnistria, roughly Transnistria, which is under Russian occupation, even though it's a breakaway part of Moldova. But we do know that Russian special operations have been in there for some time, affecting that, right? With about a brigade minus size of Russians inside there. So I think what you'll see after this bridge is connected is a Russian push to connect the south. It'll cut off this piece here. All right, and Odessa is still a strategic target for Russia that they have not quite been able to achieve. They've attempted Odessa early and didn't get it. I thought they would get it right in the first 24 hours. But we're almost 2 weeks into this, and Russia does not have Odessa. So that's a big failure on their part, I think. I already mentioned the indirect fire and air campaign over here in the north. I forgot a K. I'm a moron. All right, but the Black Sea Fleet, Russia's Black Sea Fleet is still active. And we have seen the Black Sea Fleet firing into the south, even up into kind of into central Ukraine. So they have ships in range who can fire cruise missiles and hit targets right here in the heartland. So that is happening. So watch Odessa over the next few days and see what Russia attempts there. See if Russian units positioned in eastern Moldova and Transnistria attack west to east and attempt to join up with Russian units attacking east to west across the south. That's a point of focus for me that I'm looking at over the next few days. We'll talk some financial stuff because you can't fight a war without money. And so a couple of days, Moody's downgraded Russia to default. All right, so that's probably not good. We've had 7 business days now where Russian markets have remained closed. Because as soon as they ring the bell and open their market, it's crashing. The ruble is continuing to crumble. So, basically, Russia's going bankrupt pretty fast. Sanctions are working. Sanctions are, Russia was not in a good economic position before this, and everything that's been in place over the past 2 weeks is really crippling the Russian economy. We got word today, March 8th, that the United States is cutting off Russian oil. So I've heard 8 to 10% of U.S. oil imports come from Russia. So that will have to be made up from somewhere else. And is that going to drive prices a little bit higher? Probably. So that's happening on the oil front between the U.S. and Russia. I won't get too much into Mayor Pete's comment about just buy an electric car and you don't have to worry about it. Cool, bro. Other word that just came out within the past hour, Ukraine's power grid is connected to Russia and Belarus. Which is interesting that it's still going. But expect over the next 7 to 10 days, Ukraine is going to disconnect from that network and connect into the European Union. All right, so that's to me that's pretty significant. All right, that's a tie that's remained in place for the past 2 weeks with Russia between Russia and Ukraine. That Ukraine is now cutting off and switching their power distribution into the EU, vice Russia and Belarus. All right. So I'm gonna pop down. I'll pop down to the bottom left, right, to the interesting. What's interesting to me? Ukraine's banking system is still functional. Ukraine's critical infrastructure is still functional. There are some localized attacks and bits and pieces that have been degraded or destroyed, but the vast majority of critical infrastructure remains intact, functional, and hooked up. Ukraine's telecom networks and internet is still functional, right? And internally, Ukraine rail and bridges are functional, minus those places where Ukraine has intentionally destroyed rail and bridges. All right. But Ukraine's done that. Russia hasn't. So, and it has a military purpose where Ukraine has destroyed rail and bridges. So I find that incredibly interesting that all of this inside of Ukraine still functions. It functions well. So I'll go back over the right. We'll talk questions. Russian Air Force. I think we're getting a good picture of why they are not where we think they are, and why we still have air parity. And Ukraine, in a lot of areas, has air superiority. And I think it's a combination of operational readiness, the lack of precision-guided munitions, the unwillingness of the Russian Air Force to commit their best aircraft and systems to this fight, knowing that they would be operating those at a significant risk. Second question I have, where is the Russian offensive cyber capability, particularly related to my interesting points, right? Ukrainian banking and critical infrastructure, internet, telecom that are functioning, that I would have certainly anticipated Russian offensive cyber operations would be all over. And we're not really seeing that. Also, we don't see what is happening in the realm of zeros and ones in a a counterattack or a defensive posture in Ukraine, and who might be helping with that you can't really see. All right, whether it's anonymous, whether it's United States Cyber Command, whoever, right? I haven't really seen Russian offensive cyber operations in Ukraine. I think there's great cyber defense, and there's a cyber counterattack happening, if anything is, that's really keeping Russia from having an impact in the cyber domain. We really haven't seen massive attacks on critical infrastructure to destroy nodes or transmission lines. Yes, we've seen some localized attacks. We've seen an attack on a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Fires contained. It's under Russian control, but it's still functional and operating. And we don't have, reactors melting down. I point out someone earlier today too that this is Ukraine. This is not the Soviet Union. Chernobyl was a nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union. It just so happens that Chernobyl exists in modern day Ukraine. But Ukraine's nuclear energy is not operating at Soviet or Russian standards. It's operating at Ukrainian standards, which are more aligned with the European Union, all right, and the United States, and how their nuclear power plants function, and the safety controls that are in those nuclear power plants. It's not Soviet. It's Western. So I think that's why you didn't see a nuclear disaster, because the controls and everything were in place to keep that plant safe. If it were to Russian or God forbid Soviet standards, yeah, we probably would have had a reactor meltdown. But it's not. All right, it's too standard that we would expect in the West. Right. All right, and my final question there is, Transnistria, that eastern part of Moldova, that's Russian controlled. What's going on there? When, I'm not to say when is Russia going to utilize their forces in Transnistria to conduct offensive operations in Ukraine? Because we really haven't seen them doing anything yet. We know they're there, but we really haven't seen anything come from that southwest into the southern military district. So that's some questions I have. I kind of talked in Borderlands a couple of days ago about Russian logistics, and just hit on Russian logistics and why Russia's really stalled, particularly in the north. Russian logistics is rail dependent, and that's how Russia was able to move and mobilize combat power along the borders of Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Russia. Is by rail. They moved those combat platforms, those soldiers, and the initial logistics by rail. Russia's problem is their tactical logistics units are not equipped and manned to sustain the combat formations that they're expected to sustain. So there's really no they're at full strength. Those logistics units have limited capability to sustain combat operations outside the borders of Russia, particularly when Ukraine severs the rail from Russia to Ukraine. Right? If Russia can use rail, they can resupply, much more efficiently. I won't say all day, every day, but more efficiently. When Russia cannot use rail, they have to transition logistics, classes of supply, fuel, repair parts, replacement personnel from rail to some kind of hasty depot to a truck and move it forward into Ukraine. They have insufficient truck capacity already because, like I said, their logistics formations are not capable of sustaining the combat formations that they are supposed to and designed to sustain. They're ill-designed. When you add into that this, right? 474 cars, trucks, 60 fuel trucks destroyed, right? And that's Ukrainian reporting, but that's not far off. It's pretty darn close to that. And 60 fuel tanks out of those 3 or 4 sustainment brigades that are supposed to be supporting the Russian army here, that's roughly 50% of their fuel capacity. And that's capacity. They're at 50% capacity, not 50% filled, right? So they got like 60 fuel trucks left. You know, say they're 2,000 gallon tanks. Is there 2,000 gallons of fuel in each one of those? I highly doubt it, right? So they don't have the fuel to sustain combat operations, and they're incapable of moving fuel from the rail onto those trucks and move it forward, particularly in the north where they've log jammed the major lines of communication in Ukraine. Those are log jammed. It's hard to get anything through there because there's abandoned vehicles, there's abandoned tanks and BEMPs and everything there. So Russian log is backed up and it's incapable of sustaining what Russia is attempting to accomplish. So just a logistics disaster for Russia, right? You know, and you really have to maintain running staff estimates on everything, right? All aspects of military operations, but particularly if you're going to do a mechanized armored push into a foreign nation, even if adjacent and you share borders, if you don't have an understanding of what your logistics capability is, it's really hard to plan maneuver warfare without understanding what my actual operational reach is, because that's related directly to my logistics capability. And Russia's really found that out the hard way. Multiple reasons I think this happens. I think one thing is you're not allowed to send a bad report, right? In the Russian army, in the Russian Ministry of Defense. As a sustainment brigade commander in the Russian army, I would not be allowed to tell the army commander, sir, I'm supposed to have 20 fuel trucks, 8 of them are not mission capable, and so the 12 that I do have, each has 2,000 gallons capacity, but I only have 1,200 gallons in each of them. Right? That would be an honest report, and that's what I would expect to have in the United States Army, because that informs my decision making as a commander. Ooh, I should not be launching an armored assault tomorrow because I don't have the capability to fuel my tanks. Instead, in the Russian army, my report is, sir, I'm authorized 20 fuel trucks. I have 20 fuel trucks. Each fuel truck has 2,000 gallons of fuel in it. We're prepared. Because the report has to look pretty. It has to look nice. That's what's acceptable in the Russian army. If not, you go to a gulag or you eat a bullet in the back of the head and you get kicked into a ravine in Siberia. Right? So I have to send a pretty report that paints a rosy picture. Whereas in the West, we think I would rather have the accurate report that informs my decision making as a commander, because then I understand risk when I understand capability. So that's a big problem Russia has. Right? Is, you know, professional honesty and integrity. We have that. I hope we have that. We had that inside my formations. Russia doesn't have that. It's not allowed. So I think that's put them in the position where they're at now. We continue to see Western weapons, in-law, javelin, having devastating effects on Russian armor. And that's a big lesson learned for us in the West is, the power of an anti-tank missile, especially as an armor guy right here. I look at the shots that Ukrainians are taking with in-laws and javelins from covered and concealed positions, and just devastating effect on Russian armor, right? There's no reason to believe that anti-tank weapons wouldn't have equally devastating effects on Abrams, Challenger, Leo, Leclerc. It absolutely would. Those are really good anti-armor systems, and they're having devastating effect on Russian armor. All right, so when I look at this chart here, it says Russian losses as of March 8th, 303 tanks. I'm hearing greater than 95% kill rate with javelin in Ukraine. All right. I figure the people firing the javelins are not trained to a super high standard on how to operate the command launch unit. They're given a quick how-to, and I tell you, every missile they shoot, they're getting better and better and better, right? So your best anti-armor soldiers in the world right here in Ukraine right now on employment of the javelin. That's something that, bring that back to our formations in the West, and here's how you actually use the javelin in combat. Here's how you think you know how to use the javelin. Let me tell you how the javelin actually works in combat against tanks, because they're having great effect on Russian armor. So at 303 tanks destroyed, I think is pretty darn accurate, actually. We know the javelin's a great weapon. We've seen it tested. We've seen the video of javelin hitting a T-72, and there's nothing left. It is a good weapon. It is accurate so long as the operator knows how to function, manipulate the system to get steel on target, and it seems to really be working. So yeah, that's kind of where I am here. D+13, March 8th, 2022, Russia invasion Ukraine. Like I said, I want to update this map over the next 2 days and more accurately represent Russia's control in terms of terrain, because they don't have as much as this map portrays. I like the political boundaries inside Ukraine that this map shows, but it doesn't really show the road network, which is what ties into what Russia actually controls. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try to pay attention a little bit more to Russian cyber and what it has been or has not been doing, because it doesn't seem very effective. Which is, equally surprising is the inability of the Russian Air Force to gain air superiority. Right? Russia doesn't have cyber superiority either. They don't have parity. They're losing in the cyber domain. So that's a couple things I want to look at before the next Borderlands cast, and see if I can find anything and be a positive contributor to that. So kind of wrap this up, get it just under 40 minutes today. It's almost noon Eastern, so almost 1900 in Kyiv, and so my as of time's a little later than what it actually is, but I think the key is that we're at sunset in Ukraine, and that's really the end of a lot of the fighting, at least direct action, and it will overnight that Russia's tended to transition to indirect fires and prepare for the next day actual fighting. So That's all I got for today. Get this uploaded. So you should be seeing it at about 2000 Ukraine time. All right. Have a good day, and Ukraine, keep up the fight. Great work.